right, Tom. So, in your eyes, when it comes to real estate, what is accessibility?
You know, we've talked about this so many times, Barry, and with all the people that we've talked to, it is so relative. I mean, it depends on who you ask and what accessibility needs are.
That's exactly right. So, I think what we should do is break down accessibility into sections. And I want to start with the client.
Yeah.
Because my accessibility of being in a manual wheelchair is totally different than Kenny's or Conrad's or Tanya's that everybody knows that are in power wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Versus Clark, who's blind, versus Echo, who's deaf.
Yeah.
So looking at a piece of property, you really have to break down accessibility into the area of the property and the need from the person for accessibility.
Well, you know, in unique situations too, I just realized, you know, that Cayenne that we interviewed is quadriplegic and blind. So she doesn't have touch in her fingers for a lot of the blind things. I mean, there's accessibility needs that cross two boundaries.
Right. So really, when it comes to accessibility, it goes to what we would talk about when we're talking about disability, but it's communication.
Right.
It's asking the client.
Yeah, what is it to you?
Right. What accessibility features do you need?
Yeah.
So then that leads me to the next part of breaking it down is the real estate professional.
Yes.
So their responsibility in figuring out what accessibility means is
doing what you do with every client. I mean, you need to talk to somebody and ask them, what does that mean to you? It's no different than, first-time home buyers.
Right.
What are they looking for?
Well, and there's a fear in that conversation that they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or cross the line. So it's making sure that realtors and real estate professionals know that there's an open dialogue there with their clients to be able to have that communication line open.
Yeah, and that's a whole different conversation that you and I can have on another podcast is, you know, that fear factor. So, you know, we can kind of, let's address that as a future topic, but you're absolutely right. I mean, every time I've got a new client, one of the first things I ask him is, how do you want to be communicated with? You know, what's the best way to talk to you? Do you like text? Do you like me to call you? Do you want to get face-to-face? It's an individual thing.
Right. But it really comes down for the person who's doing the real estate side of this is knowing that without the communication, we're not going to get where we need to go. So it's okay to have that conversation.
Yes.
Right. Well, so then I'm going to move to the next thing, which we break real estate down into two sections, one's selling and one's buying.
Yeah.
And I want to start with selling first because accessibility in terms of selling are the features that your clients have already put into a piece of property.
Yes.
So advertising those is a huge advantage.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, one of the things that's interesting, and we'll probably talk more about this, but the Northwest Multiple Listings just came out with a new software called Finding Homes, which uses AI, and instead of typing in 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1,200 square feet, now you can talk scenarios. You know, I've got a client where I've got, my parents are downsizing. They're in a big house. They want to find something, close to shopping that they can get to. And AI will go out and look for those features, but it isn't going to find any features if you haven't described the features.
Right.
So that's one of the things I think is so crucial in accessible listings is listing what you've got.
Right. And not being afraid that you're going to do it wrong because you're really just listing what you've got. I know there's this pushback on, well, what if I get it wrong? What if it's not really accessible? But you don't have to worry about that part of it because if it has a feature, you just list the feature, just like you would a bedroom or a bathroom.
Right.
You list the feature that it's got, and then you let the buyer decide whether that feature, accessibility-wise, works for them.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about selling and buying, from our perspective of doing this for so long now, is that when you're selling a property, you're selling the features, and we're using terminology that describes the feature. But I'm going to flip it now to buying, because when you're searching for a property, you're actually looking for different things than what the listing agent is listing.
Yeah.
So for example, when you're selling a property, you don't use the term ADA.
Right.
Because the ADA is for public consumption and has nothing to do with residential real estate.
However,
but yet, when you're searching, all those real estate professionals out there who use the term ADA in their listing remarks, you should search for the ADA. So there's really 4 aspects of this. There's the client side, which is all about communication. There's the real estate side, realtor side, which is that same communication on the other side of it, where you're asking the questions. There's selling the property, which is highlighting all the features you've got. And then there's how do you find those features? And you put those things together, and accessibility in residential real estate isn't really that scary anymore.
Yeah, and I think a realtor's job anymore in this day and age is to be descriptive. I mean, you're trying to make your property discoverable, and discoverable isn't like it used to be. Well, there was a little, quarter-inch ad in the Sunday paper in black and white. And now it's...
You're dating yourself now.
True. Fortunately, you didn't have to do it back then. But yeah, I mean, somebody's got to find your place. There's somebody out there looking for the place that you've got. So do everything you can do to make it more discoverable.
Right. And accessibility adds value to that property.
Yeah.
And people lose sight of the fact of that, because we've got realtors that push back on us and say, hey, I'm going to have to remove all this accessibility stuff because it, decreases the value of the home. But that's not the case.
Yeah. But, unfortunately, it's somewhat true, too. I mean, we talk about accessibility, and then there's, accessibility with forethought, where there's you've given it some thought and you've taken some time to do it right. And then there's a reaction, which we see a lot of. Somebody hadn't anticipated the need for accessibility. All of a sudden, they can't get around. And the only thing they can do is put a big plywood ramp up to the front of the house. Well, it doesn't add any value to the house. It makes it accessible, but it doesn't necessarily add value. So there's something to be said for, one, being proactive rather than reactive, which is easy to say sometimes.
Right.
But thinking long terms, I mean, we talk about when we've got clients that are remodeling. If they're in middle age, we're saying, think ahead. You ought to be thinking, in fact, a little side story, with the Northwest Universal Design Council, one time we spoke with John DeChantis, who was with the Seattle Housing Authority, and they do bids for public housing. And one of the things, they were really interested in universal design, because when they build the building, they plan it out for 25 to 50 years to try to get the return on the investment. So they're looking, if they're building something that's inaccessible that they're going to have to remodel in 10 years, that makes it significantly more expensive than if they just did it right to begin with. And it's kind of the same thing when we're talking about remodeling your home now. You got to be thinking about accessibility features, because, statistically speaking, you've got a good probability that you may have some mobility issues or some other need for accessibility.
All right. So overall, accessibility adds value.
Absolutely.
And it's figuring out how to portray that properly. So those that are selling, it adds value. Those that are buying, like me, I'm looking, it adds value.
Yeah. And there's a whole demographics to adding that value. When we look at the demographics around accessibility, disability, there's 85 million baby boomers that are changing every day.
So it's 11,000 are turning 70 every day until 2036.
And by 2030, the population over 65 will be greater than the population under 15 for the first time in history.
So accessibility is important.
Important.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.